Center for the Study of World Religions, Harvard Divinity School.
Good morning, and thank you all for being here early on a Friday. My name is Jeffrey Bro, and I am a program lead for the Psychedelics and Spirituality Initiative at the Center for the Study of World Religions at Harvard Divinity School. This is a role that I have had the pleasure of serving in alongside my friend and colleague, Paul Gillis-Smith, who is down here in the front. Paul and I founded the Psychedelic Intersections Conference as graduate students in 2023, after noticing that many of the psychedelic research efforts underway at Harvard were operating in silos, with little formal opportunity for scholars to meet and collaborate across disciplines. The psychedelic humanities have accelerated dramatically at Harvard since and really at universities around the world since our first conference. And this fourth and final installment of the Psychedelic Intersections Conference feels like the realization of our original vision: a space for scholars and practitioners to come together beyond their disciplinary boundaries, to engage in rigorous interdisciplinary investigation of psychedelics, and to build bridges across worldviews, cultures, and methodological approaches. This year's conference is a collaborative undertaking by the Divinity School's Center for the Study of World Religions, the Faculty of Arts and Sciences Mahindra Center, and the Petrie-Flom Center for Bioethics at Harvard Law School. The next 2 days will feature presentations from nearly 50 scholars and practitioners. These scholars represent a community coming from 21 universities across 5 continents, and working in more than a dozen disciplines. You will notice on the conference programming and on the slide here, the image of light refracted through a prism. For many psychedelic users, maybe especially those who consider these substances sacred, psychedelics are revered for their ability to act as reverse prisms, substances that reveal out of diversity an underlying unity. From many, all one, as the soap bottle will tell you. Such an insight, powerful though it may be, is not the aim of this conference. Instead, our goal is to take what may first appear to be a unified concept, the psychedelic or psychedelic studies, and act as a prism, revealing the diversity contained within it. To quote one of psychedelic studies' most enduring celebrities, William James, quote, "Acquaintance with reality's diversities is as important as understanding the connection." He goes on in a truly great James turn of phrase, "The world is one, yes, but how one?" End quote. Being able to ask the question of how, or in what ways we connect to one another in this field without flattening difference, is one of the unique benefits of academic spaces like this. Over the next 2 days, we will have an opportunity to look at the many facets of these weird substances, and in fact, to move beyond the substances to consider the people and communities that understand psychedelics in myriad and often irreconcilable ways. The conference is structured so as to illuminate the many ontologies, epistemologies, histories, practices, and theologies that shape psychedelic studies and psychedelic culture, without attempting to find a single truth or narrative that we all must rally behind. Each panel, in order to do this, each panel is organized around a shared theme or question. What are contemporary psychedelic spiritualities? What are the psychedelic humanities? What do psychedelics reveal about the law? And then within these panels, we have placed scholars working across disciplines and with divergent perspectives in the hope that by putting people in conversation together, we can better attend to psychedelics' diversities as well as its intersections, so that we can hopefully better understand the how of our underlying unity. To orient you on our journey over the next 2 days, let me briefly preview how the conference will unfold. First, our entire digital program can be accessed on the QR code on the screen or in your program brochures. This includes the full speaker biographies and all of the abstracts for the talks you will hear over the next 2 days. Signs outside will point you to the restrooms, and to the 3 rooms where panels will be held. The room you're in currently is the James Room, which will hold all of our plenary sessions. The Cotter Room is right outside to the left, and that will hold our 2 concurrent panels, as well as a live stream of all of the keynotes. And finally, the Braun Room, which is down the hall here all the way to this side of the building, will hold our 2 conversation sessions, a space for people to engage in conversation with one another, as well as with the speakers in a more relaxed and less me at a lectern style. For our lunches over the next 2 days, the vegetarian and omnivore meals will be served on this floor, with meals for people with dietary restrictions available downstairs. Please do only take meals that you indicated during registration, as we have a limited number of meals for people with dietary restrictions. We have over 600 people registered on Zoom for this conference. So for all of you out there, there are 2 Zoom rooms that will allow you to watch the panels over the next 2 days. You are currently in one of them, which is for all of the events in the James Room, and the other Zoom is for the events in the Cotter Room. You should have received an email with links to both of those Zooms, and they're also on the conference website. I do want to make one programming change note. Unfortunately, Tiona Zazul, who was scheduled to be tonight's evening keynote, has come down with a serious cold. We are very grateful that Noah Feldman, the Arthur Kingsley Porter University professor at Harvard Law School, was willing and able to deliver tonight's keynote in Tiona's absence. Following Noah's keynote tonight, there will be a welcome reception open to all attendees and speakers on the floor below us. And then after tomorrow's evening keynote by Benjamin Breen, there will be an optional off-site showing of the mushroom cure. If you're interested in that, details and tickets are available at the QR code in the program brochure. Finally, there are genuinely too many people for me to thank in my limited time, but I do want to take a few moments to thank some of the people who have made this event possible. First, I want to thank the team at the Center for the Study of World Religions, Lori Sedgwick, Bashwar Khan, Sarah Iannotti, and Deborah Blackwell, who have put in countless hours helping us prepare for these 2 days. I also want to thank everyone supporting the event from across Harvard Divinity School, including Robbie Rhodes and the AV team, Pedro Vendija, Bridget Miller, and everyone on the facility, security, and custodial teams. I also want to thank all of the graduate student assistants who are helping us behind the scenes to make today and tomorrow run smoothly. Thank you as well to our keynote speakers and to all of our panelists for their time and scholarship and for traveling sometimes many days to get here and be with us. Thanks as well to all of you joining in person and online, and to the Gracias Family Foundation for their generous gift to establish the Harvard Study of Psychedelics in Society and Culture. Additionally, a huge thank you to Professor Stang and Gosha Sklodowska for their leadership of the Center for the Study of World Religions and for their support of this program over the last 3 years. Thanks as well to Professor Cohen, Susanna Baruch, Professor Clark, Stephen Beal, and the entire team at both the Petrie Flom Center and the Mahindra Center for all of their work to prepare for this event and for partnering with us to make it a truly interdisciplinary and fitting capstone to the Harvard Study of Psychedelics in Society and Culture. Lastly, thank you to Paul Gillis-Smith. These remarks are on behalf of both of us, but despite spending a truly remarkable number of hours in a very small office together, we have not yet merged into one person. Something that will come as a surprise to some of you who have confused us, or to any of you who have confused us in emails, which is a almost daily occurrence. So thank you, Paul, for being not only an impeccable colleague, but a truly extraordinary friend and human being. As all of these names and thanks reflect, an answer to James's question of how one, at least when it comes to this conference, is that unified endeavors require the commitment, care, and support of a great many. They require a community, and this is one that I could not be more honored to be a part of. So thank you all for being a part of the community that has made this event possible. With that, I will now introduce our next speakers, the leaders of the 3 organizing centers that compose the Harvard study of psychedelics in society and culture. The first to speak will be Professor Stang. Dr. Stang is professor of early Christian thought and director of the Center for the Study of World Religions at Harvard Divinity School. Under his time as director, the center launched the Transcendence and Transformation Initiative, now in its 5th year, which has included the program on psychedelics and spirituality. With that, Professor Stang.
Thank you, Jeff, and welcome again. Welcome to the 4th annual, and I am sad to report, likely the final Psychedelics Intersections Conference here at Harvard Divinity School, or rather, at Harvard. These conferences, as Jeff mentioned, were made possible by the generous gift of the Gracias Family Foundation, which established a 3-year pilot study, the so-called Harvard study on psychedelics in society and culture. The 3 centers that Jeff mentioned collaborated on this study. Each of our 3 centers, I'm very pleased to report, have supported field-defining and field-changing research and programs in our respective domains: religion, law, and the humanities. And by collaborating, the 3 centers have created a 3-legged stool of sorts, a firmer foundation for the future of the psychedelic humanities. I first want to thank my colleagues from our partner centers, Glenn Cohen and Susanna Baruch from Petrie Flom, Susie Clark and Steve Beal from the Mahindra Center. It really has been a pleasure working with you over these past several years, and I am extremely proud of our work together. This conference is a capstone event of our collaboration, and I would like to take just a moment to thank you and to celebrate the work we've done together these past 3 years. So please join me in applauding the work of my colleagues. The future of the Harvard study of psychedelics in society and culture is uncertain. I will be stepping down as the director of the CSWR at the end of next year, and the center's Psychedelics and Spirituality program is unfortunately coming to an end in just a matter of months. The future of this work will depend not only on future fundraising, but on further vision and further commitment from Harvard's administration and faculty. I'm proud to be among those who have put my shoulder to the wheel of this effort for several years, but others at this university will have to soon step forward. So, I'm very sad that the center's program in psychedelics and spirituality is coming to an end. And as I approach the end of my time as the director, this program is one of those of which I am most proud and most grateful. And my pride and my gratitude center on the 2 young men, both HDS alums, who have led this program and who have envisioned and executed all 4 of these Psychedelic Intersections conferences. I mean, of course, Jeffrey Breaux and Paul Gillis-Smith. I hardly need to... Your applause came early, but I love it. We're gonna do more of it. I have a lot more to say about these 2. Don't worry, not that much more. I'll keep these remarks brief. I hardly need to remind this crowd that research and programming at the intersection of psychedelics and religion began in earnest at Harvard in the 1960s, but all but disappeared following the war on drugs and the passage of the Controlled Substances Act. The center's efforts, led by Jeff and Paul, have reestablished this area of study at Harvard Divinity School and have built an interdisciplinary community of scholars and practitioners that are equally invested in the academic study of psychedelics and the real-world implications of this work. Their work has approached psychedelics and religion through three interdependent efforts. The first focused on developing the field of psychedelic chaplaincy. The second on advancing academic research on psychedelics and the study of religion. And the third on raising literacy in public conversations about psychedelics and religion. So permit me to just say a few words about each of these three efforts. First, developing the field of psychedelic chaplaincy. In the past year or more, Jeff and Paul have developed and hosted 2 psychedelic chaplaincy intensive workshops for practitioners in both clinical and community settings. That is, one primarily designed for therapists and another for church leaders. I know some of you in the audience have attended these workshops. I've spoken with you. Between the 2 workshops, they helped train 50 participants, including VA chaplains, clinical researchers, therapists, psychedelic church leaders, and retreat leaders. These workshops are ready to be scaled up and taken on the road. I'll come back to that. Secondly, their efforts to advance scholarship in the psychedelic humanities through the study of religion. The program has produced over 17 academic publications in psychedelics and religion. Jeff and Paul have pursued themselves 3 research projects. Together, they led a joint research project on psychedelic and ketamine chaplaincy. Paul has pursued his own research on the history of religion in psychedelic psychotherapy. And Jeff has been conducting ethnographic research on contemporary novel psychedelic churches. This research has been published or featured in such diverse venues as Nature, Mental Health, Anthropology of Consciousness, Harvard Theological Review, The Guardian, Rolling Stone, and other major media outlets. And as editors, they've also produced 2 conference anthologies, collectively featuring nearly 40 chapters, ranging from ancient religions to indigenous plant medicine traditions to contemporary psychedelic spiritualities. Third, their efforts to shape the public conversation through psychedelics programming. Under their leadership, the program has had 25 interdisciplinary events since 2024, drawing over 5,000 attendees. They've organized 4 annual conferences in this Psychedelic Intersection series with over 1,500 attendees annually. It convenes scholars and practitioners from across the globe. I want to thank those of you who have traveled so far to reach us. I believe the furthest afield is Rebecca from New Zealand. And I want to also thank those of you who are joining us on Zoom. I'm assuming that our Zoom attendance is equally global. Some other achievements I will briefly mention. They have hosted for 3 years a psychedelics and religion reading group for the Harvard community, led by Tristan Angieri last year and by Paula Ortiz, Lila Rimolowski, and Emily Lippold-Cheney this year. Those 3 I know are in attendance. Thank you for leading that reading group this year. Jeff and Paul have led dozens. I want to say, well, hold on, I'll get to that in a moment. They have led dozens of Harvard's psychedelic history walking tours. These are great fun if you have not been on them. And you guys change them up, I think. So you can, no 2 tours are exactly the same. This is actually a really wonderful way of seeing both the history of psychedelics and how it's entangled with Harvard's recent history. And I want to acknowledge J. Christian Greer, who, when he was a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for the Study of World Religions several years ago, started both this reading group and this walking tour. So Jeff and Paul have evolved that project, and it is ongoing, and it's been a wonderful. So thank you, Christian. And And finally, Jeff and Paul have also supported 2 postdoctoral fellowships we have had in psychedelics and religion, and 5 in-residence visiting scholars. I want to conclude with this. You may have a question. What comes next? I don't know. While the Psychedelics and Spirituality Initiative may be coming to a close here at the Center for the Study of World Religions, this program is ripe to continue in many different settings. Jeff and Paul developed their work here as a multi-year project, which is now looking for a new home. The psychedelic chaplaincy program, for example, could be integrated into either a psychedelic research center or a nonprofit organization. Our wish at the center has always been that this initiative, this program, would plant seeds that would continue to blossom after this year, after the 3-year pilot study. And while that may not be possible at the CSWR directly, I hope to shepherd these 2 and their excellent programming into newer and greener pastures. If you are interested in joining that effort, please reach out to me or to them directly. But in the meantime, let's take this final opportunity to thank these 2 for their leadership and amazing work these past 2 years. It's truly been an honor. Am I to introduce? You can. Okay, I'll defer to you, Jeff.
Thank you. I'm a little speechless, which is uncommon and unfortunate because I do have to introduce someone. I get the privilege of introducing Susanna Baruch, who will be our next speaker. Susanna Baruch is the executive director of the Petrie-Flom Center for Health Law Policy, Biotechnology, and Bioethics at Harvard Law School. She oversees the center's research portfolio, programming, fellowships, and projects like the Petrie-Flom Center's project on psychedelics law and regulation, and the center's widely read blog, Bill of Health. Her work has appeared in JAMA, the American Journal of Bioethics, the Journal of Law, Medicine, and Ethics, many other journals, and Slate as well. And she has proudly served as camp director of the Petrie-Flom Center's Psychedelic Boot Camp in both 2024 and 2025. Welcome, Susanna.
Good morning, everybody. As Jeff said, I'm the executive director at the Petrie-Flom Center for Health Law Policy, Biotechnology, and Bioethics. I will come back to that very long name at the end of my remarks. I see in this room, and I'm sure on Zoom, leaders and scholars and researchers and lawyers and clinicians and scientists and advocates and skeptics, and so many people that I have met through the Petrie-Flom Center's work in psychedelics throughout the last few years. Welcome, and our faculty director, Glenn Cohen, sends his warmest regards from Hong Kong. We are all living in intense times, and I am particularly grateful for having terrific colleagues. Thank you to the Center for the Study of World Religions and Harvard Divinity School for hosting us, Professor Stang and Gosha, and especially Jeff and Paul. You had a vision for this joint conference, and through a combination of scholarly brilliance and community organizing, you pulled it together. Congratulations. Thank you also to the Mahindra Center for the Humanities, Professor Clark and Steve and your team, for being excellent colleagues and for your vision and your elegant execution of the Mahindra Grant Program, which has really helped so many pursue projects in this area with creativity and zeal, really deeply enriching this field. And I want to thank the Petrie-Flom Center team. I thank them often, but I can't thank them enough. And special gratitude to Lisa Gorelick, who is here somewhere, hello, who is always here and ready to help. Our work on psychedelics law and policy began quite a while ago during the pandemic with tremendous help from the vision and work of Mason Marks, who I will say more about in a moment, we secured a first grant with the SciSafe Foundation, Tim Ferriss and Matt Mullenweg, which enabled the founding of our project on psychedelics law and regulation. And we believe POPLAR, as we call it, was the first academic initiative focused on psychedelics law, policy, and ethics. The generous gift from the Gracias Family Foundation establishing the historic Harvard study of psychedelics in society and culture came at just the right time, and we were raring to go. Our work at Petrie Flom has included many expert convenings, affiliated scholar groups, prolific publication, a Harvard Law School course, a forthcoming book from Cambridge University Press, 2 multi-day psychedelic boot camps, and a policymakers summit. Our work even appeared briefly on John Oliver's Last Week Tonight. I'm looking out at the crowd. Is Mason in the audience? I don't see him. So Mason Marks, who will be here, he's moderating a panel, has been really the center of our work and has led the POPLAR project. He has also established and led the Pulse project on psychedelic use, law, and spiritual experience with the benefit of 2 Mahindra Center grants, which explores the topics at the intersection of law, religion, and psychedelics. So I want to just say these have been very consequential years in psychedelics law and policy. Societal interest is increasing, be it through getting access through legalization, decriminalization, an FDA-approved product, or religious use, traditional use, underground use, or otherwise. We know that the FDA is going to continue to consider psychedelic products. And states like Oregon and Colorado, and increasingly others, have pioneered or thought about new regulatory frameworks that we think will continue to demand careful scholarly analysis. This increased interest in psychedelics has also appropriately brought some scrutiny of how psychedelics may have led to harm or could lead to harm in the future for vulnerable groups and individuals. And at core, at Petrie Flom, we've committed to evidence-based psychedelics law and policy in the promotion of safety, innovation, equity, and access. Now, some of you may think that the idea of a legal research and analysis project and the involvement of a bunch of lawyers seems a little bit of a strange vibe in the field. Our work has always been fundamentally interdisciplinary. It's why we're so grateful to have such good colleagues. In addition to conferences like this, we've been in scientific and medical spaces a lot because we believe that that helps ripen mainstream interest in psychedelics research. So I want to end on 2 final points. The first one is a big thank you. So at Harvard Law School, we are blessed with excellent colleagues like Professor Noah Feldman and his colleague Jay Michelson. We have had sort of, if you've had children or spent time around children, we've had sort of parallel play for a while where our work has been our work and their work has focused on religious traditions and how Christian, Jewish, and Muslim traditions might pursue religious psychedelics use. Jay is going to be moderating a panel session tomorrow. And this afternoon, as Jeff mentioned, you will hear from Noah Feldman, who was generous enough to step in on extremely short notice when our planned keynote speaker had to withdraw. If you have heard Professor Feldman speak before, you know that this afternoon's talk, In Search of Synthesis, promises to be both brilliant and expansive. We're very grateful that he was able to do this for us. And lastly, a word about Petrie Flom. We love cutting-edge topics, ones that span all the words in our name: health law, policy, biotechnology, bioethics. We've worked on the legal and ethical issues surrounding national football players' health and the issues involved with the league's care for them. We're working currently on a big project on medical AI. We also have current projects that range literally from embryos to aging. I hope you'll follow us, subscribe to our newsletter, follow us on social media so we can keep you up to date on what we're cooking up next. Thank you. Enjoy the conference.
Thank you, Susanna. I now have the privilege of introducing our second Susanna, who will be speaking this morning, and who will also introduce our morning keynote. So Susanna Clark is the director of the Mahindra Humanities Center and the Morton B. Knaffel Professor of Music at Harvard University. Her area of scholarly expertise is the history of music theory from the era of Haydn and Mozart to the early 20th century. And she also works in 12th and 13th century medieval music linked to the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. In recent years, she has given talks on how the historical and cultural understandings of classical music and its performance and recording practices have shaped the use of music in psychedelic therapy. Please welcome Susanna Clark.
Well, greetings, everybody. It's also my great pleasure to welcome you all to this Psychedelics Intersections conference. I'd also like to echo my two colleagues in offering a warm thank you to Jeffrey and Paul for everything you've done to bring us all together here today, and it's wonderful to see so many people. In my capacity as director of the Mahindra Humanities Center, I'd also like to thank Charlie Stang and the other Susanna Baruch, as well as Glenn Cohen. It's been tremendous working with you all these last 3 years. And again, in bringing this conference together, I'd like to thank the team at the Mahindra Humanities Center, and in particular to say that it was the executive director, Steve Beal, and our program coordinator, Lindsay Fraze, who spearheaded the work from the Mahindra side in putting this conference together and in running the program over the last 3 years. So thank you to both of you so much. So as already mentioned, the Psychedelics in Society and Culture Initiative at Harvard has been a 3-year project, and the conference this weekend is very much a culmination of these intersected programs. I thought I would give you a little flavor of the Mahindra Humanities Center. As Susanna said, we have overseen much of the funding here at Harvard, but it's through events like this that we have also been inspired in what it is that we ought to fund. In other words, hearing from the public and hearing from speakers from across the world who come to Harvard. So we've been supporting through this path-breaking research across all disciplines, as you know. The study of psychedelics is an inherently interdisciplinary enterprise. The funding has been not so much about clinical investigations of psychedelics, but rather fresh ideas that stimulate original, meaningful collaborations amongst the hard sciences, social sciences, the arts and humanities. And true to the legacy of the polymath William James, the initiative has engaged scientists, lawyers, law professors, doctors, journalists, philosophers, historians, archaeologists, linguists, folklorists, mythologists, psychologists, students of religion, as well as artists, musicians, performers, filmmakers, and writers. And I'm sure that list is not complete. So research on psychedelics has focused on their broad use in cultures across time and geography with the goal of shedding new light on age-old questions about human meaning and existence. I'm sure some of the things we will be contemplating in the next 2 days is what would a natural history of the human imagination look like if psychoactives had a role to play in it? How ought we to write a history, and ideally, of course, a global history of transcendence, transformation, and mystical experience? How ought we to address the sovereign protection of the plants, ecologies, and traditional healing wisdoms of threatened groups? How do we address philosophical issues and questions about consciousness posed by experience of self-transcendence? The Mahindra Center has, in the last 3 years, supported 36 individual research projects across Harvard, and I'm just going to mention a couple. For example, we were part of supported the founding of a new magazine of psychedelic art and literature called Elastic, and we recently heard that it was named a finalist for the National Magazine Award for Fiction, alongside the New Yorker, the Yale Review, the Georgia Review, and the Drift. Just this week, a film, Entangled Minds, by Julie Melozzi was previewed in the Carpenter Center at Harvard. We've also put on a digital art exhibition, Microcosms, a homage to the sacred plants of the Americas, that used laser scanning confocal microscopy to vividly reveal intricate 3D cellular architecture of sacred and medicinal plants that was done through the medical school. We've also supported live concerts, Sounding Psychedelia, and that was by a composer-performer, Micah Huang, who was a graduate student in the Creative Practice and Critical Inquiry program at Harvard. We are soon to launch, that is in the fall of 2027, so I hope you come back for it, an exhibition in the Houghton Library featuring items from the Ludlow Santo Domingo Library, carefully crafted to have the Hanagram LSD Library, which is the world's largest private collection of material on altered states of mind. So as I said earlier, you know that the study of psychedelics is inherently interdisciplinary. The conference that we are about to begin is a prime example of this. I look forward to the next 2 days, during which we will all go on a quest for psychedelic intersections, and we will all go on a quest to bridge the humanities, religion, and law. I would like to thank also the Grazius Foundation for their vision in bringing the Psychedelics in Society and Culture initiative to Harvard, and for making this conference possible so that we could bring all our speakers to you and that our participants can be fully participant while they are here. So we look forward to hearing from our speakers and to engaging with our participants. Welcome all of you to Harvard University. Welcome from the 3 centers at Harvard, the Petrie Flom Center, the Center for the Study of World Religions, and the Mahindra Humanities Center. Enjoy the conference and indeed this precious time together. And now I think we should begin with our first keynote enterprise. Thank you very much. So are we going to pause to put people up here, or shall I begin the intro?
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Hi, good morning.
Great, fantastic. So it is my great pleasure to introduce the first keynote speaker of the conference, Ramzi Fawaz, who is the Romness Professor of English in the Department of English at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he's also affiliated faculty at the Department of Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies. He's the author of The New Mutants, Superheroes, and the Radical Imagination of American Comics, which was published in 2016. And it was a book that was awarded the 2017 ASAP Book Prize presented by the Association for the Study of the Arts of the Present, and winner of the Center of Lesbian and Gay Studies Fellowship Award for the best first book manuscript in LGBT studies. He's also published the book Queer Forms, that's also with NYU Press. And in fall 2026, he launched his new podcast, Nerd from the Future, which I have to tell you, you need to listen to. It's absolutely wonderful. And as he puts it, it playfully debunks popular myths about the modern university. So I want to say thank you for doing that on behalf of higher education, a much needed thing at the moment. So Ramzi joins us today with ideas from his new book project titled How to Think Like a Multiverse, Psychedelic Lessons for Embracing a Diverse World. He's already published articles in this area, and through the website, you can click on articles to 2 of them that he has given to us to share with you, and please do read them. The format of this keynote, as you can see, is going to be a conversation. So Ramzi will be in conversation with Philip Deloria, who is the Leverett Saltonstall Professor of History at Harvard University. He's the author of a number of landmark books, including Playing Indian, Indians in Unexpected Places, and Becoming Mary Sully Towards an American Indian Abstract. This last book which promoted the Native artist Mary Sully, led to an acclaimed single artist exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 2025, and also the Minneapolis Institute of Art, as well as a number of other places where she has since been featured. At the Mahindra Humanities Center, I will say that Phil runs the Native Cultures of America's seminar series, and also he's a fabulous colleague. So with that, I will hand it over to both of you. Please join me in welcoming.
I'm hoping you can hear me. Oh, you certainly can. It's so nice when it all works. So I just want to say first that, Ramzi, it's such a pleasure to be in conversation with you. I've taught your books, you've taught my books. You blurbed my book that one time. So I'm really looking forward to it. You have been thinking a lot in the last years about psychedelics, but also about popular culture, as you are wont to do, and about the failures and opportunities that come with our efforts to think about and to institutionalize that thing we have called diversity in the last number of years. And then also about some possible ways forward. That thinking is going to shape our conversation today. And as Susie mentioned, right, Ramzi's in the middle of this scholarly project that's taken shape in the form of book proposals and articles and things like that. So there's a lot going on here, and it seems to me maybe the best way into our discussion is by way of a quick overview from you of this body of thought. So I'm wondering if you would just give us a quick summary of where you're at.
Absolutely. First of all, I'm so honored and delighted to be here. Thank you. Look at this crowd. Like this is crazy. I've been very fortunate to share a lot of my ongoing work in the psychedelic humanities over the last couple of years, but it's rare that I've ever been directly in a crowd of people who specifically work on psychedelic studies. So I sort of feel like I've made it. Like I've made it. So the core of my project, How to Think Like a Multiverse, starts simply with this very, very basic question of, like, in an increasingly xenophobic world, what is required? What is the mindset required for people to hate difference less? Like, it's simple as that. I'm interested in, like, how do people become less racist? How do people become less homophobic? What is required to shift our relationship to difference so that we feel, when we encounter radical otherness, we feel excited about the exchange, right? And so in some ways, it's an extension. If you've ever read across my oeuvre, I'm just fascinated by cosmopolitanism. Like the idea of, like, what does it look like to have cross-cultural, cross-difference exchanges that are nonviolent, loving, open-hearted, excitable, and open to mutual transformation. And so my thinking sort of started with the book Queer Forms, where I was writing about gender and sexual nonconformity in the 70s, and the ways in which the movements for women's and gay liberation had so successfully managed to disseminate through media and popular culture such a wide variety of new perceptions of gender and sexual diversity to the American public. And when I was presenting on that work years ago, there was a gay man in his 60s who raised his hand at the LGBTQ Center in San Francisco, and he said, "I love what you're doing. This is so inspiring. And I just want you to remember that all of us who are part of these movements were always on LSD." And I was like, oh yeah, no duh. I've been teaching the Cockettes for years, you know, the glam drag group. I've been teaching Tales of the City, where all of the characters are basically on drugs throughout the entire story. And so a seed was planted in my mind. And it was around that time that I started having my own psychedelic experiences. And I began to also encounter media. Oh, here's a little bit of the 70s. Sorry, I flipped a little bit ahead. So there's the 70s. I was reading some of this kind of work. I was having my own psychedelic experiences. And then I was watching popular culture. And I was thinking, American popular culture is starting to become so deeply psychedelic, and all of its psychedelic imagery is about diversity, is the problem of cultural identity and encounters across difference. And so I decided that I would pursue this project of looking at the ways in which contemporary American media and popular culture is trying to train the American public to encounter difference in new and unexpected ways through distinctly psychedelic aesthetics. And so I stage in the book this encounter between American media and popular culture, psychedelic experience and the modern humanities. Because if you think about it, the modern humanities is obsessed with the problem of diversity. Like since the 1960s, since the radical movements of the 60s, the humanities has been obsessed with the idea of how we negotiate differences in literary and cultural production. So the last thing I'll say about that for now is I look at a variety of really visionary and extraordinary psychedelic texts, like the Spider-Verse movies, Everything Everywhere All at Once, the Southern Reach trilogy, the television show Undone. And I do this very weird thing in every chapter where I take a form of media or popular culture that I think is doing something psychedelic, and I triangulate it with a particular drug-taking experience. So I'll say, Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, this very weird, enchanted, beautiful film about a little shell that speaks, is actually modeling its aesthetic on the experience of taking MDMA. And by doing so, it's introducing viewers to a long-running existing thought process, the indigenous kinship worldview, the idea that goes back thousands of years among indigenous North Americans, that we're all sort of interconnected, that there's a gift economy between human beings and non-sentient life. And so I do that in every single chapter to basically say we're already being taught by contemporary media and popular culture how to relate to each other in a more loving way, if only we would learn the lesson. And so like I'm trying in each chapter to kind of translate that lesson.
This is a fabulous project. I've had
Thank
such
you.
pleasure reading around in it. I mean, I wonder if we can go back, a little bit to the beginning in some ways, because underlying all of this recent writing is a set of critiques about thinking about our current strategies.
Yes. Oh, totally.
About diversity. One that suggests that we have sort of narrowed down what is a highly diverse, highly differentiated world, and not done so simply in sort of the terms of cosmic terms or other than human terms, but in humanistic terms as well, right? So it's pretty easy, I think, for us, sort of sitting where we are, to question the current round of attacks on that thing or that object called, diversity. Critiques that we easily cluster around xenophobia.
Yeah.
But you have other kinds of things, and I think what's really energizing about your reading, here is both your critique of kind of the neoliberal commodification of the diverse, and even more importantly, and to the point, your dissatisfaction with the social justice approaches to diversity. And I wonder if we could begin with those critiques as we then move into thinking about these things.
I mean, a lot of my book, this book that I'm working on, comes out of my, as you put it, my deep dissatisfaction with a certain social justice logic that can only imagine or understand difference in terms of woundedness and injury. I mean, this goes back to Wendy Brown and Wendy Brown's notions of wounded attachments, which she writes about in the late 1980s. It astounds me that despite the fact that we in the humanities have spent at least the last 40 to 60 years developing some of the most nuanced and supple assessments of difference, intersectionality being one of them, that we still almost only talk in the terms of gender, race, sexuality, nationality, sometimes ability. That's shocking to me. Like, human difference is so unbelievably multiplicitous. We have such a dearth of language to talk about temperament and personality and spiritual worldview and mood. And for all of the discussion of affect, which I know we'll get to, in the humanities, some of you may know that there was a huge affective turn in the humanities. The majority of the people writing what we called affect studies know nothing about the human body. They don't know how the body feels sensation. They don't know anything about cortisol in the blood. They don't know anything about stress. And they talk about affect discursively as like something that we describe in language. And so for me, I'm deeply frustrated that the logic of injury, A, assumes that difference is always a place of pain, B, that it's always a place of lack that must be redressed, and that differences must be guarded zealously against the perceived encroachment by outside forces on them. And so what happens is that a certain social justice discourse becomes all about protecting people, assuming that identities are sort of like owned by people in a possessive logic, which to me is like, if you're an anti-capitalist, why would you talk about identity as something that you possess and you own? As a gay person, I'm sort of like, if you have affinity to gay culture, go for it, girl. Like, I don't feel that I am the purveyor of the logic of gayness or that I own it. And sometimes I'm not really interested, I said this the other night, in participating in gay culture. Like, sometimes I watch it, And I'm like, I'm so glad that people feel affinity to this. I'm going to go do something else. So for me, I often say that my primary identity in the world is that I'm an intense person. Like that is, I feel much more attached to a temperamental experience than I do to the fact that I'm Middle Eastern American or I'm gay. And some of those identities then all, become amalgamated. So, when I look at students sometimes and I say to them, I'm like, intersectionality, for all its incredible richness and importance, it is ultimately a legal framework for redressing harm. And I say to them, it cannot explain well, to use Aaron Saldana's terms, right? Like the viscosity of your interaction in the classroom, the fact that you're clashing with someone over personality differences or over differences of intensity of the way you enter the classroom. And so for me, I really want to offer the humanities an opening out and to say to them, look, we already have a huge range of theories. We don't need to invent a new theory. We have theories like mestiza consciousness, like the indigenous kinship worldview, like Edward Said's worldliness. The humanities has many multiplicitous theories of difference that are deeply psychedelic in their orientation. And my project is not attempting to invent a new theory, it's attempting to remind us of our own existing lineage.
Yeah, I mean, so...
these are versions of it. These are other chapters of the book.
So I think this to me is such a salient critique of sort of where we've been around diversity. So if we were to say we kind of know what it's not or what it has, where we have failed.
Yeah.
But in this, I'm wondering sort of then how you think about what it is, what a more diverse world, a more expanded universe, what the canvas of that broader kind of sensibility actually looks like or feels like. What are its elements? How do we grab it?
I love that. I often say to people, diversity can't really be a value because it's just a fact. It's just the fact that we live in a plural world cannot be a value. It simply is, right? It's I'm sorry that this keeps kind of sort of bopping in and out. And so part of what I say is that if diversity is a simple fact of life, the plural existence of the universe, then what we have to do is develop really meaningful responses to that fact. Mm-hmm. And so for me, human beings have invented so many different models for encountering the simple fact of plurality. Buddhism accepts impermanence. It accepts the idea of interbeing, the idea that we're all somehow interconnected universally. You think of radical democracy, where radical democracy at its core, the political theorist Hannah Arendt would remind us that the reason democracy is one of the most powerful political forms, she says, is because it responds to the mere fact that none of us are like each other. So we have to develop political forms where we listen to other perspectives, we absorb them to a certain degree, and then we imagine how we would respond, right, without becoming another person. So for me, the elements of embracing a diverse world, which, by the way, are deeply connected to psychedelic experience, they require the releasing of your singular view of yourself as a single ego, an acceptance that you are more than one thing, and so are other people, the acceptance that we all share this earth, and yet none of us experience it the same way. That is fundamentally the truth of set and setting. Right? It reminds us that even as we all have the same physiological capacity for feeling, none of us feel exactly the same way. And so when we have psychedelic experiences, they're irreducibly singular while also sharing certain properties, right? So to me, there are a series of very obvious practices we can develop that already exist in all these traditions. And I think, again, a lot of what I do in my work is I say, we already do a lot of this stuff in the humanities classroom. So a central aspect of my work in this book is arguing that the humanities classroom is like psychedelic therapy. It's just that we don't give drugs, we give movies and literature and media, which literally goes into people's brains, right? People's optic nerves are are looking at these movies that we're showing them, these works of literature, they're being physiologically affected, and then we sit and we integrate the experience every single week. in a classroom. So the fact that we already have, like that is the way that we train students to encounter a diverse world, is to have encounters with media and culture that shake them to their core. And then we look at them and we say, what happened to you?
Yeah.
Like, do you want to talk about what happened to you? So I think, like, again, a lot of the book, I'm rambling a little bit, but like a lot of the book is really about the return to common sense, to the common sense, ordinary way in which we negotiate differences with people in everyday life. And to remember that the fact that we do that constantly every day means that we can accentuate it, we can be self-aware about it, and we can create settings like the humanities classroom where we actually work on improving and refining that capacity to encounter otherness.
So I've got a whole sequence of questions. I want to come back to pedagogy.
Oh yeah, totally. I love talking about pedagogy.
But what you did, I mean, I think it feels like thus enter psychedelics, right, at this point, right? I mean, so you've given us in some ways a kind of, a set of descriptive kind of possibilities, the sort of cosmic connectiveness, the sort of egolessness, the sort of, these kinds of things, which, then can be linked to what I think is also in your work kind of a lexicon of like the trip. This is what happens. In these things. So, as you were talking earlier, about queer forms and the ways in which this was sort of an addition problem, right?
Yes.
It's like the queer 1970s plus we were all on LSD. Plus Michael Pollan and the emergent literature on psychedelics with a little Buddhism thrown in for good measure. And then the final piece, your own experience.
Yeah.
And we were talking earlier this week about what that looked like and what that meant. And I'm wondering if you'd be willing to sort of take that book or your work as a kind of case study for thinking, not just about creativity, but also about rigorous thought in terms of psychedelics. So what did you learn in terms of your own experience as you were working through a specific kind of project?
You mean working through this new project?
No, through queer forms.
Oh,
really.
yeah.
In the sense that, I'm now seeing this historically, but I'm also understanding it experientially.
Yes, that's such a great point. So I think what happened to me when I was writing queer forms was that I began to think about, in the 1970s, it was not merely that people had to make demands for their rights as women and queer people. They had to convince others that gender and sexuality are mutable categories. Like the fact that most people just assume that gender and sexuality are fixed, are one thing. You had to introduce people to new models. That's what I call forms, right? New forms of gender and sexual diversity. And the primary way I argue that happened in the 70s was not by moralizing at people or yelling at them that they were homophobic and transphobic. It was about introducing forms of media and popular culture that shocked people's imagination. So like, how many people are familiar with Tales of the City? It's an extraordinary work of culture. It was a serial gay fiction that was published in the San Francisco Chronicle over the course of 2 years. It was then turned into a bunch of novels and a bunch of TV shows. And it's just a story about a group of gay and straight and bisexual friends living in an apartment complex with a transgender landlord who is like the beloved character of the story. And this was shocking that a fiction about queer people and their sex lives was being published in a major newspaper that was supposed to be about journalism, right? And what's amazing is that San Franciscans, I interviewed like 35 San Franciscans who read it in the paper in the 60s, who are now in their 70s and 80s. And I studied the ways in which those people were transformed, like they became less homophobic and less transphobic because the work of art worked on them daily over and over and over again. They were reading it in the paper, then they were talking to people in public. Like you would be on the bus and you'd be reading this story and people would look at you and they'd be like, oh my God, did you see what happened to Marianne? Like, did you see about this? Did you hear they went to an orgy? Like they blah, 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 right? And it was the iterative, that's a word people kept using last night. It's like the iterative serial nature of that experience that worked on people's imagination. And during the time I was writing that book, I was having my first psychedelic experiences and realizing that like those were also serial experiences where I was having these radical affective transports and then I was talking to people about them and I was being changed by that experience through its kind of ongoing serial nature. And I thought, that is what media and culture does to people. It doesn't do it in one shot. It's not like if you read a Toni Morrison novel and then became not racist, like that would be lovely. And we know that doesn't happen, right? But we do know that culture does change people. Like we wouldn't do the work we do if it didn't. But it doesn't change people in a one-to-one relationship. It happens through these ongoing collective interactions where we share our interpretations of the experience. So that was kind of the fundamental lesson for me of queer forms, is that a cultural form does its work not merely because it exists and enters your consciousness, but because you develop an interpretation of it and then you share that interpretation with others. And that elicits a response which changes you if you're open to being changed. And to me, I thought, that is what psychedelic therapy is. It is having a radical affective transport, thinking about what it did to you, and then sharing it with others in a spirit of exchange, which is why if you read across my work in psychedelic studies, I'm just very disinterested in the medicalized model, because I just don't think that psychedelics are going to heal any one thing in any one direct way. Just like the humanities classroom does not suddenly heal students, it works on them in an iterative, ongoing way. It's a sustained therapeutic and cultural experience that may open the door to them making decisions that will be beneficial to them, and it may not. And that is its beauty, is its unpredictability. And so like queer and feminist forms in the 70s were unpredictable. There was no way that you were gonna watch The Boys in the Band or Barbarella or Zardoz, and at the end of it, you were gonna just become gay. Right? But you might. Like, that's the thing, right? Is like, you might. And so I was so interested in how forms do that to people, and that really translated into this project, where I'm saying, like, the beauty of the psychedelic experience is not that it causes one thing, it's that it creates the possibility for so many things that could happen. Right? And again, that to me is exactly what culture does.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. These are all exercises of contingency.
Yes.
Constant contingency. It's also about sort of the I and the us, the me and the we kind of project. I mean, I think back to, I taught at the University of Michigan in the American Culture program, where we did a lot of the diversity requirement teaching. My junior ethnic studies faculty were like, I am going to transform this class. And I'd be like, you're going to get terrible teaching evaluations.
It's so true.
Because you cannot be didactic, in that kind of way. But what we know from our own research on our students is they enter at 18 with certain kinds of views about diversity. They leave at 22 with different kinds of views. So we are part of a serial project.
Absolutely.
Right? The kind of seriality of it.
But can I say something to that? I mean, a dear colleague of mine, Nirvana Tanuki, who teaches at Dartmouth, she once said to me, like, would you be okay with the idea of a student taking one of your classes, say on AIDS activism or the queer and feminist 70s, or on psychedelic imaginaries, and like at the end of it, they become like more racist? And I said, I can't control that. Right? Like that is actually the answer she wanted me to say. It was like a trick question. I was like, I have no control over that. Do I want that to happen? No. Am I in the job of ensuring outcomes? No. I'm a catalytic agent, like psychedelics are, right? Like the professor is a catalytic agent for a certain set of possibilities, and all I can do is share my little perspective, right? Like I say, I have a view of the world, it's always changing, but it has certain contours, and I'm gonna share it with you, and then I'm gonna ask you as a student, like, what do you think? Like, what do you think of this perspective that I shared? Is it yours? Is it not? How does it relate to you? Right? And that is all we can do. And then we leave the door open for all these possibilities.
If only the rest of the world understood this is how we teach.
Yeah. I mean, I said this joke yesterday today. I'm like, J.D. Vance went to Yale Law School at the height of critical race theory. And like, guess what? So, I mean, anything is possible.
Well, I mean, certainly this is one of these things that I understand with our students. When I first started teaching, I was a very young-looking young faculty member. And it was like, oh, elder brother kind of guy. And then I became their parents, and it was like they would react just definitively against anything I would say.
That's so interesting.
And now I'm their grandparents, and they like me.
Isn't that amazing? That's amazing. That is amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's a phrase that jumped out as I was reading through, and it was the phrase, the visceral experience.
Yeah.
And I was taking it in the sense as a broad category in which psychedelic pathways might be seen in a broader kind of way, right? Not just a psychedelic experience, but a set of possibilities or pathways being akin to or allied with religion or spiritual kinds of experiences, or to altered psychological states that are achieved through other kinds of ways or forms, or other kinds of experiences of meaningful sort of embodiment. So, on the one hand, it's easy to reduce this to brains and chemicals kind of, discussion. But on the other, you have a kind of broader world of, numinous encounters with the other and other kinds of ways of thinking about. So, religious studies, comparative religious studies in particular, it seems to me has given us all these kinds of ideas, as you mentioned, about how to think in an expansive world. And I wonder about the ways that visceral, which for me puts the body back into play, as you've already suggested, moves us away from any temptation toward mind-body dualisms and these kinds of things, but also asks us to situate kind of bigger and broader, other than human kinds of worlds. So I'm wondering about if I'm wrong to sort of situate the visceral as being absolutely central to this, and how we might think about how we might use this then to think about psychedelics in relation to other forms of experience which are not necessarily psychedelic. I mean, when we were first talking, I'm like, I am not the guy because I had that one time with mushrooms and that was it.
Totally.
But I've had any number of other kinds of experiences of altered states that came in out of different kinds of things. So I'm wondering then how we think about psychedelics relative to that broader kind of world.
I love this question because I think it gets to the core of one of the main interventions of my book, which is that I want to basically say, if the study of psychedelics remains focused on using psychoactive drugs to find a magic cure to human immiseration, I think it will disappear like in the next couple of years. It'll just be like Valium, it'll be like opioids. Like, the simple fact is, it's such a cliche and we just will not learn it. There is no magic bullet to human pain and suffering. The Buddhists knew this very well. Like, there is no one, we live in an incredibly multiplicitous world that is filled with trillions of variables, of sensory variables and non-sentient variables and all these things. How could we ever imagine that one thing, whether it's AI or psychedelics or whatever, is gonna solve like, that makes no sense. So for me, part of what I'm doing in the book is I'm saying, yes, it is important to pursue certain medical strands of psychedelics while remembering that its value is not the medicine, it's the framework for thought that psychedelics might offer us. These elements that seem to be shared among many psychedelic experiences, but not all, right? The idea of the disorganization of the ego, the kind of the felt sense of interconnection with the universe, or the encounter with contingency, the contingency of your own identity, of other people's selfhood. These are incredibly useful, transferable concepts that can exist far outside of the drug-taking experience. And at the end of the day, millions of human beings will never take drugs, whether because they don't want to, or they don't have access, or because they have a history of mental illness or whatever. So if we want the psychedelic experience to teach us something, it will have to be able to be abstracted a little bit from the drug-taking experience and to be translated into other spaces. So for me, what I do in the book is I say close reading is a form of psychedelic experience that the literary humanities teaches us. Like, it is a form of intensified affective engagement with a text where you are looking at something and saying, what is it doing to my body, right? Like, when you're reading a novel or you're watching a movie and you're thinking as a close reader, you're asking yourself, like, this text is an interlocutor and it's trying to do something to me, right? And it's affecting my body in a particular way. And we're trying to go into the text to understand its logic. And when you understand the logic of a text, it suddenly reveals something to you about your relationship to it. Like, that is what close reading is. And to me, that's an altered state of experience. Thank you. I mean, I'll give a very specific example. How many of you have ever read the Southern Reach trilogy? You guys, okay.
There's one in the back.
Tomorrow, you need to go buy it. It is, one of my articles is about it. I wrote a piece called Literary Theory on Acid. And this is an extraordinary book. I won't give away too much because actually I was about to give away a really important part of the book, but since so many of you have not read it. But the book compares the experience of reading to the experience of inhaling fungal spores. So there's like an amazing moment at the beginning of the book. It's all about this alien region of Florida in the future that becomes mutated and nobody knows why. And an expedition goes in and cannot get out. And there's this extraordinary moment where the main character in the first novel encounters writing on a wall that's literally made up of fungal spores. And they're like, a plant can't create writing. Like, what is that? And she gets too close to it and it explodes in her face. And she breathes it in and she doesn't tell anybody else in the expedition because she's like, they're gonna think I'm a terrible biologist that I didn't protect my face. And what starts to happen to her is that the entire world begins to like glow. And everywhere she looks, everything becomes pulsating all of a sudden. And part of the way I read that is that the book is describing what reading is. Mm-hmm. Reading is an infection. When you read words on a page, it's now in your brain. Like electrical signals have fired and you cannot remove it from your brain, right? Like you have been infected by that text. And part of what close reading does is it gives you the agency to see things with more clarity because you're paying so much attention. And that is essentially what psychedelic experience is. Like one of its descriptions would be it's an attentional economy. It expands your ability to pay attention to the world's particularity and specificity. And that is what close reading does. So that's one example of an altered state that is not taking drugs. But I told you a minute ago before we started, when I teach my class on psychedelic imaginaries, I always say to my students jokingly, I say, of course, we can't legally do drugs together. And even if we could, I wouldn't want to do drugs with you. But I tell them, I'm like, but I want you to imagine that you have the agency to put your body, without hurting yourself, into high intensity experiences that can be adjacent to altered states. And I joke with them, I'm like, all of you drink at this school. It's like a famous party school. So you already do that with certain kinds of drugs. So I give them an assignment where I just say, I want you to go and do something very intense for 30 minutes. I want you to go on a run, jump in a cold plunge, go to a sensory deprivation tank, which we have in Madison. I give them a list, like listen to a Burning Man DJ set with your eyes covered. And I say, like, the one rule is it cannot be anything that would hurt you, right? So I give them all these instructions and I put them in groups and I say, you can do it individually or in groups because they work with groups the whole semester. And I mean, I had a group that went to a sensory deprivation tank and they cried for an hour. They had no idea that it would be so emotional and it was so cathartic for them. And then I have them write 3 pages, stream of consciousness, like what happened to you? So sort of like a trip report. And it is amazing, as Christian always says, you know, that like all of the experiences that seem distinct to psychedelics are innately part of the human physiological experience of affect, right? So like the beauty of psychedelics is simply that they remind us that we can feel that much and that widely. And I've said in my essay, Tripping on Mushrooms with Edward Said, I say in that essay, what makes me so sad about so many humanists is how afraid of feeling they are, right? It's like whenever I talk about doing work on psychedelics, so many people I encounter in literature and history are like, I don't want to lose control. And I'm like, maybe you need to, number one, because you seem so uptight. And number two, like, lose control of what? Like, you're completely lucid the entire time. You're afraid of feeling things that scare you. Like, it's not about losing control. It's about feeling so widely. And so yeah, anyway, I'm going on at length, but that's, yeah.
Yeah. You know, Ramzi, I always love it when you go on.
Thank you.
It's good. You know,
that's why I have a podcast.
Yes. It does remind me, so I'll free associate for a minute.
Yeah, go for it.
Right? I mean, you know, I've been really taken by, there's an account of a young Lakota boy, brave buffalo, who looks at the world and sees the world, and his perception of the world is expanded for some reason, right? And he says, who made this? And he says, who made you? Yeah. It's actually an address to the world. Yeah. Right? And the answer, you know, all in coming out of the Northern Plains traditions, you know, is always like, pay attention, right? And you will figure it out, right? Yeah. These things will come to you. And it makes me think of the ways in which, like, for example, when Black Elk Speaks came out, which is a book which contains the admonition, pay attention, right? You know, the marketing was, as trippy as an LSD. This is
Oh,
like late
amazing.
60s,
Yeah.
70s, right? You know, like an
Yeah.
LSD trip. So his vision is being read, right, in these sort of psychedelically adjacent, you know, kinds of terms. I think, you know, of like, you know, my sort of, I would say I've had one sort of like very serious kind of spiritual encounter. But interestingly to me, you know, I mean, some of the things that we're describing are not exactly quite the same, right? So ego, I did not experience a kind of ego dissolution, right? A kind of oneness with the world. What I experienced was a kind of ego splitting, where in fact, half of my mind remained completely rational, felt detached from me, was watching the other half of my mind move into a kind of sacred terror, right? And a deeply embodied kind of like quivering sort of, you know, and so it was, and I felt like the two halves of my head were sort of able to speak to each other somewhat, right? And the sort of oddness of having a kind of distance rationality relative to another kind of experience for me was in some ways like the fundamental experience. It wasn't necessarily the sort of numinous terror of being in a particular kind of scary, you know, place and time, you know, kind of thing. So it makes me just want to pursue this question about how we link the psychedelic experience as a trip, let's say, to other kinds of things, right? I mean, is it the case that we should, in fact, kind of find ways to differentiate these things and think about them rationally? Or should we look at ways to sort of actually break down differentiation and say that they are, in fact, some way connected, right? And how might they be connected if, in fact, we want to say that? And I don't know that we do.
I think we can do both. I think we're smart enough to do both. We can distinguish experiences as having unique contours while also saying that they relate. So you and I have talked about this before. Like, I think, right, we know that there is no one universal singular psychedelic experience. The cultural historian Ido Hartogson would say that the one shared element of most psychedelic experiences is intensity, is amplification, especially affective intensity. But I think that within that experience of heightened intensity, we can name so many different elements, right? What is it? The Masters and that famous like Varieties of Psychedelic Experience book, like right at the beginning of that book in the 60s, they name at least 30 different elements of intensity, right? So for me, what is most valuable about the psychedelic experience is its multiplicity and its contingency. The fact that it forces us to encounter so many different variables in the world as concatenating all at the same time, right? Like we think so much about set and setting because it forces us to think about all the variables that go into a specific psychedelic experience, which is also just a description of life. Like every single human being is made up of trillions of little variables that make you distinct in a particular way. So for me, that element of psychedelic experience that is about contingency and multiplicity exists in so many other lived experiences. So you just named it. You said that when you had this spiritual experience, you encountered yourself as multiple, as divided. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Right? And I would say for me, and I should admit that this is one of the first times I've talked publicly about some of my own psychedelic experiences. I also did not experience ego dissolution. I experienced ego multiplication. And so what I felt was there's a very vivid experience I had one time with a group of friends where every time I wanted to say, but Ramzi's like, right? Like, but I'm this kind of person. I'd be like, like I kept trying and I was like, whatever, so stupid, right? Like I just kept wanting to describe myself as a certain kind of person, like, and it was just a joke. Like in my mind, I kept laughing at myself. Like, you're so dumb. Like, of course you're not just that thing. Like, of course you're not just intense. Like, you're also really gentle and sweet and funny and whatever. And I loved being reminded that I'm so many things. It's also why I really love internal family systems therapy as a concept, like, right, which has been getting a lot of criticism publicly lately, but as an idea is like fascinating. So I think like those two qualities, contingency and multiplicity, which are existentially descriptions of the world as it is, right? They, of course, are transferable to other experiences. And so I had mentioned close reading earlier because that's what it is. It's an encounter with the contingency of the text, its multiplicity of meanings, its multiplicity of encounters with people, and also the fact that it speaks to different minds. And so it speaks to many different consciousnesses. So yeah, I mean, I absolutely think that it's possible to say psychoactives are a class of drugs, that we can identify all of these various ways they seem to affect different people by drawing on neuroscientific studies, first-person accounts, et cetera. And we can also say, as Christian and others say, like, this is also coterminous with so many other aspects of what it means to be a person.
Yeah, yeah. It makes me think, we were talking last night about sort of, my experience doing sort of field teaching.
Yes, yeah.
Out in Wyoming, and taking students to Yellowstone and the Tetons, and the moment where we had our class on Thoreau.
You're still mastering it. It's okay.
The good news is, Charlie just left. Oh no, there you are. I went to the Thoreau film screening the other day, and and what was super reassuring to me is that every single speaker who's talked about it, like the first time they said it, they were like Thoreau, and then they went right back into Thoreau, which I do. But we're talking about this sort of moment, right, in terms of like, say, close reading, a kind of transcendent experience, where my co-teacher, Greg Crane, and I would sit down with the second chapter from Walden, where I lived and what I lived for, the night before we were actually going to have a class discussion of it. And we would sit around this picnic table sitting at Yellowstone, and our students would surround us, and we would just read. I would read a paragraph to him, he would read a paragraph to me, I would read a paragraph to him. We would stop whenever we wanted to. We were doing close reading kind of encounter with this text, which is full of little monkey puzzles and things that are like always getting you thinking about things. And we'd spend a couple hours, doing this kind of close reading. And then we sent the students off to go and read the text themselves. Yeah. And then we had our class the next day over on a beautiful sort of spit of rock overlooking Yellowstone Lake. And we'd talk for hours, right, about this text. I mean, it really, and then we would dive into Yellowstone Lake, which is incredibly cold, but we knew where there was this hot spot in the lake. And we didn't find it every year, but if you could find it, the hot spot was so hot you couldn't stand on it. So you'd be next to this thing in this cold water and hot water, and you'd have this thing, and there's an eagle flying by, and it's like, and as I was saying, like the whole class, we were high for a month afterwards.
Amazing.
But so then here's the question, like we were high for a month, and then we went back to not being high on Thoreau.
Sure.
And I wonder about sort of like how you think about, I mean, one of the things you talk about is sort of the importance of integration, and like how you take like the trip experience or the close reading experience or the things. We can't always be tripping, and we can't always be close reading. And so how do you think about sort of taking the insights that come with this experience and then expanding them, broadening them, making them part of, I'm thinking about the ways in which Thoreau critiques what is essentially the robotic life.
Yeah.
Right, and sort of says, like, only 1 in a million and 1 in 10 millions and 1 in 100 millions can strive for the poetic life. I mean, he's sort of encouraging us to reach for that kind of moment that I think we're talking about, but we can't do it, right? Yeah. I mean, we can't really do it. So how do we think about trying to do it, right, in our lives? What does it look like? And
well, part one, I want to say what's extraordinary about this teaching experience you had is, again, talk about thinking about set and setting for learning. That what you did there, I'm going to use that word again, you concatenated so many different variables. You said, we're going to read out loud. We're going to speak it. We're going to look with our eyes. We're going to experience physically getting into the water. We're going to feel hot. We're going to feel cold, right? Like you're putting the text within a world, is what Edward Said would say. You're putting it in a worldly context. And in some ways, you're also sort of slightly recreating Thoreau's experience in that he is in nature and he is writing about it from within it, right? Like he's in the forest, he's writing from this space. And you're saying, what if we recreated just a tiny bit of what it's like to be out in the world feeling? And, I talked to a few people this week. I teach at the Esalen Institute every year. I teach a 5-day workshop, and I sort of change the topic a little bit each year, but it's generally sort of a version of this book. And what's amazing about that experience is I get to teach little snippets of some of these texts, like 5 pages here, 10 pages here, and then I make them go out onto the Esalen campus and experience things, right? And I say we're going to feel mestiza consciousness in our body, because I'm going to ask you to go and find a border space somewhere, right? Mestiza consciousness is all about identity as a borderland. And I say, okay, find a border between hot and cold, or between grass and flowers, or whatever, and cross that border and materialize the experience of what you read in your body. So I think that's one way in which you translate an extraordinary affective transport into everyday life, is you literally find metaphorical or analogical things you can do to translate that experience into everyday life. I think the second part of your question that is really important to me is like something I'm really pursuing in this book is, how do you go from thinking to doing? Like, how do you go from having these extraordinary affective experiences, having transformative moments, and then actually implementing that in behavioral change? Like, part of the reason there's such an ongoing debate about abuse in the psychedelic therapy community is that we're so horrified that people who claim that they're having these transformative experiences are not changing, right? Like that they're literally not changing in their everyday lives. And that is the biggest struggle that we all go through. You can go to therapy for 30 years and still be an asshole, excuse my language, right? One of my friends, Sam Stern, who runs the podcast for the Esalen Institute, he said, I don't really buy into psychedelics as that healing, because he's I have a ton of male friends who've been doing LSD therapy for 20 years and they're still jerks, right? So for me, the question you're asking is how do you go from thinking or knowing to doing? Mm-hmm. And I think that only happens through experimentation, through thinking about, I had this experience, it felt transformative. How do I translate it into my everyday life? And when I'm teaching with my students, I just try something different every week. We go in and I'm we're going to meditate to music. We're going to meditate silently. You're going to do a group thing. We're going to go outside and sit in the sun. We experiment with different forms of emotional regulation, with different forms of transformation and change. And the point is to say, I am going to start behaving in accordance with what I have learned as a result of this experience. And that's really what I'm trying to do with this book, is to say, what does it mean to know diversity differently, and then to start acting in relationship to it differently. And there's no one way. Mm-hmm. There are many ways. It's why I have a yoga practice. It's why I meditate. It's why I travel the world. It's why I go to raves. It's why it's why I play video games. They're all different ways of activating my sensorium in everyday life. So I'm not just doing the same thing over and over and over again. So the answer to your question is you have to experiment with behavioral change that implements the things you experienced in those magical moments, and accepts that most of life is also neutral, is lived in neutrality, is sort of boring. And so that's beautiful. That's what it means to be living in a contented way with these occasional explosive moments, to shake yourself out and then say, how do I then reintegrate that into my life? Which, by the way, is exactly, I think, what we do in our teaching.
Well, this is so much about the ways in which sort of psychedelic pedagogy, it both has a kind of set of goals and objectives, as we do as teachers, but also a kind of free-form sense of experimenting. I mean, it feels I feel such a current of Buddhism through everything.
I'm mentioning it a lot because I think of myself as a lay Buddhist, and I find that, and I know we only have a few minutes, but I wanted to say, you can see from everything I've been doing for the last hour, is that a lot of this project operates through associational thinking, where I'm saying, the beauty of the psychedelic experience is it might allow us the weirdness, the excitability to connect different traditions historically that are not usually associated with each other. So when I'm reading Buddhist literature and then I'm reading the political philosophy of Hannah Arendt, her thinking on democracy is deeply Buddhist. She believes in the idea of impermanence, that nothing is permanent, that everything changes, that there's no such thing as a politics based on singular subjectivities, that we're all interconnected because we share the earth. And it's very unusual, that there are these connections you can make. So I often invoke things like Buddhism or self-help. I read a lot of the work of people like Gabor Mate and all of that, because I'm thinking these are people thinking holistically. about the world, and we can connect all those traditions in different ways. So it makes sense that, like, I'm glad that that's sort of like sparking, because I like to sort of invoke all the different traditions that I'm reading unsystematically, and to show how they're sort of overlapping in surprising and unexpected ways.
Yes. Okay, here's a formal question.
Okay.
In a bit of criticism in the New York Times Sunday magazine just last week, Parul Sehgal, writing about Ben Lerner and the possibilities of the novel, sort of the reclamation of the novel, if folks read this piece of criticism, wrote that Lerner, quote, makes a case that reading, our experience of decoding, observing patterns, interpreting and misinterpreting language, is not merely a means of accessing a version of reality, but an event in itself and a profound encounter.
Yeah.
The novel, she writes, is our great communal dream, the place that reveals what composite creatures we really are. I feel like she's totally channeling you. So one might take this utterance as a confirmation, right, of the connections that you're drawing between text and culture and the psychedelic experience, and I do, and I suspect you do. But I also wonder if you might also find it limiting, in the sense that you also seem to want to push us beyond novels and these strong and lovely claims of criticism into a new kind of new humanities, right? Humanities with some bite to it, with some edge to it, a kind of prescriptive practice of humanities that isn't afraid to perhaps be a little bit didactic. And I'm wondering if you might say a little bit more about what this new humanities might look like.
This is actually a great place for us to end. This is so perfect. I love this. I don't understand how people can make these beautiful, expansive claims for things like reading and transformation or whatever, and then say it's about the novel. Like, the constant need to make things singular is exactly what is leading psychedelic science in the wrong direction, right? It's the same thing with literature, the need to say, let's go back to the novel, as opposed to the idea of, like, let's create as many opportunities as possible for people to engage with culture broadly, right? Let's find as many reading events as we can in many different contexts. So I agree with the first part of that claim. I think reading is an event. I think of reading here not only as comprehending, but interpreting, like making meaning, making judgments about things that are happening in cultural texts. But it doesn't need to be reduced to one kind of cultural object like novels. It doesn't need to be reduced to one drug taking experience or one drug protocol or one anything. You know, like, the solutions to a variety of human problems will themselves be multiplicitous. And this speaks to, you know, what we've been talking about this last couple of days, is that I do believe in a more prescriptive humanities. I think the humanities has made the terrible mistake of giving over prescription to STEM, an area that is irresponsible, that does not feel that it has any claim to moral or ethical uplift of people, any claim to democratic thought or life. And our job should be to also say, here are some best practices we've learned about the world from studying human diversity, culture, history. Do with it as you will. We don't need to give people rules or doxa. We can say, here are best practices. I tell my students, reading is emotionally regulating for me. Try it, see if it works for you, right? There is a way in which humanists can lay claim. That's why the book is called How to Think Like a Multiverse. Like, I'm sort of limbing on pollen, but I'm also saying, like, the humanities can also tell you how to live. And it doesn't mean there's one way to live. It can tell you that there's a million different ways to live, right? And that we can be honest about the values and biases of each way of living, and then you can decide whether you like that or not. You know, and that, to me, is the gift of the humanities, is the possibility of that we can, in a self-aware way, say, here are our values. You don't have to take them, but maybe you could take 10% of them, and it would be useful.
Yes. And that is a fabulous way to close. Please join me in thanking Ramzi Fawaz.
Thank you.
cswr.hds.harvard.edu. Copyright 2026. The President and Fellows of Harvard College.